breaking news from the Stream Center. Here's JB Biunno.
A tragedy in our nation's capital. More than 60 people feared dead after a flight landing at Reagan Airport in Washington, D.C. collides with a military helicopter last night, leading to the scenes that you're looking at here. We have live cameras plus awaiting press conferences. The NTSB briefing is going to be taking place this afternoon. We'll have it all here for you from the Stream Center. Welcome into the Stream Center, folks. JB here with you live across all platforms. The circumstances here are terrible, but we've assembled a team to break down the very latest as to what is going on in Washington, D.C. Let's show you here live what is actually going on at this moment. This is now no longer a rescue operation. This is a recovery operation, and I'll get you the latest here from the Associated Press. They're reporting at least 28 bodies have been pulled from the Potomac River after the American Airlines jet that was carrying 60 passengers plus 4 crew crashed last night with an Army helicopter while landing at Ronald Reagan National Airport. This is the scene right now as the recovery operation is currently unfolding. We have other live cameras to get to, but first, let me bring in the entire panel here and show everybody who we're going to be talking with throughout the course of the coming hour. Beginning here above me, stream producer Garrett Phillips, who's going to be going over the very latest with us here momentarily. Joining us as part of our sister station, WSNN, Eric Kasnick, who's also a Navy veteran. He's going to be talking to us a little bit about the conditions out there last night. And joining us from USF, Jim Cardoso, Senior Director for USF's Global and National Security Institute, a retiree of the United States Air Force going back to 2018 when he was serving as a colonel at the time. We appreciate everybody taking time out of their day to join us. To people in the comment section, we will be focusing in on the comment section to take your questions live. If anyone has a question for Jim or Eric or Garrett or myself, we'll be paying attention to Facebook Live and YouTube Live as well to try to get you the very latest. But first, I want to show you this video that came in late last night. This is courtesy of EarthCam. It shows the moment when the crash occurred. You can see it there at the center of your screen, and right there, that big flash of light, and you can see the aircraft plunge downwards into the icy waters of the Potomac. I'm going to get to Jim here in just a second, but Garrett, I'd like to start with you. What's the latest from the Associated Press? What's the latest that we're hearing on this story?
Well, as you mentioned, unfortunately, what was a search and rescue mission has now turned to a recovery effort. They said at least 28 bodies have already been pulled from the water. They are currently searching for more. As you mentioned, all 60 passengers and 4 crew members that were aboard the American Airlines flight are feared dead. The plane was coming back to Washington from the 2025 U.S. Figure Skating Championships in Wichita, Kansas, and included 2 Russian coaches as well as many of the U.S. national figure skaters, rather. And you know, they were. I mean, it was pretty much all figure skaters, coaches, families, and friends were on this plane. There was a report that AP had mentioned recently where the air traffic control had essentially diverted the plane somewhat last minute to a different runway, and then had gotten contact with the helicopter involved, trying to get them to go basically behind the plane, and unfortunately that did not seem to occur.
Now, there's going to be a lot of folks out there that want to know about the cause of the collision. We're going to be getting a little bit into that, although right now we don't have too much to go by other than that morning press conference, which we'll touch on here in just a moment. The NTSB, obviously, now the lead agency that's going to be taking over basically the investigative, really, future of this story. When it comes to the soldiers that were aboard the Black Hawk helicopter, it was said to be a training flight. We hope to find out more about them. We're learning, of course, as Garrett noted, more about the passengers that were on the American Airlines flight. The recovery efforts are going on right now, but they have been going on since last night. Some 300 first responders braving the icy waters of the Potomac to try to get to the wreckage site. It's about waist-deep water from what we understand it, and the conditions are absolutely awful. They've encountered ice, frigid winds. It's winter in our nation's capital. And if you've ever been to Washington, D.C. or really anywhere in the Northeast during winter, you can just imagine how cold it is, especially at night. Let's bring in Jim Cardoso, joining us from USF. Jim, it's good to have you on. Great to have your expertise here on stream. You hear about this story last night. What's the first thing that's going through your mind?
Well, obviously, it's a terrible tragedy. Just watching that video, I mean, it really is something to see. This is airspace that is used frequently by both the jets flying into Reagan International and also helicopters transiting the airspace using the Potomac River. So, I look forward to seeing what the investigation is going to yield in terms of why these two aircraft that were, most likely flying on flight plans and flight routes that have been flown many, many times, came to the same point in space at the same time.
Garrett, I'm going to let you know, we just had a White House press briefing feed pop up. In fact, I'll show it to our audience here. And we're anticipating word from the White House here shortly. So a little bit. But Jim, how unique is it for shared airspace like this? Now, obviously, we have Tampa International Airport here in Tampa as a local reference, right? We have MacDill Air Force Base here as well. So when we're talking about shared airspaces and the fact that these two flight paths were, so close together, is that a common thing for airport airspaces? Is that not common? What would you say?
It's common. Obviously, up in the DC area, it's very busy airspace. A lot of traffic in and out of our nation's capital. I mean, even here in Tampa, there are airspace routings through the airspace that deconflict. Light aircraft, light civilian aircraft, and the commercial jets flying into and out of MacDill International. Also, the jets flying into and out of MacDill Air Force Base. So, a lot of aircraft are using the DC airspace, so they have very specific flight rules and routings to ensure simplicity of deconfliction.
So when it comes to the approach of the American Airlines flight, we heard this morning in the press conference, right, that this was a normal flight pattern for the aircraft that was on approach, and it was a normal flight pattern for the military helicopter, the Black Hawk that was taking off from the Air Force location, or excuse me, from nearby, in essence. What I'm trying to get at is, if they're both in a standard flight pattern, where's the deviation, right? How could this occur if both aircraft are in a standard flight pattern?
Well, you're asking the very question that the investigators are going to be asking very quickly as well. I mean, because that's the question. Where is the deviation? If this is a pattern, a routing that has occurred many times, my understanding is the jet was on final approach for runway 33 at Reagan International, and the helicopter was transiting north to south along the Potomac River. Again, both common flight routings. So what happened? Where's the deviation? I know that there's some air traffic control audio that has the tower talking to the helicopter, telling them to look for be cognizant of the traffic of the CRJ aircraft. We don't yet know the response from the helicopter because it was a different frequency, but that'll come out in the investigation as well. But that's what they'll be looking into. Why, if these are commonly used routings, why was there an accident?
I'm going to bring it up here momentarily, but I see the flight pattern from FlightAware. Have you seen that yet, Jim?
I've seen some. I don't know if I've seen the exact one you're about to show.
All right, so let me see if I can. I'm just going to load this up into my computer really quickly, folks. So bear with me as I try to get this up on screen, because it's interesting to note the flight patterns themselves. So here, I think we have it, and here it is on screen. So the yellow image that you see there is the Army UH-60. That's is correct. The helicopter path the Black Hawk that is basically making its way and curving its way south. And then the path of the plane itself, the American Airlines flight, is the purple line that you see on the bottom of your screen, or really towards the banner there on the bottom of your screen. So here's what I'm looking at, Jim. I'm looking at the pattern for the Black Hawk, and it takes this southwest turn, or at least from our perspective, right, this southwest turn to the lower left. There really what appears to be at the last moment, Any idea if that is a deviation or if that would be standard, or what? Could you try to even explain that?
It's hard to explain. A lot of it is conjecture, and I want to avoid too much conjecture. I would say the routing south along the Potomac River is pretty normal for helicopters in that area. That's probably what they were directed to do by the air traffic control, and that's what they did. That jink you see at the very end to the southwest, kind of away from land, that could just be the helicopter, because the helicopter probably was directed to stay over the water, stay over the Potomac River. And so you can see they're a little bit close to the bank, and then they just turn right. I would imagine it was just a fairly regular and not of, there's no huge reason why they would have turned away from the bank, other than they came up close to the bank and then they made a right turn, it looks like, to just make sure they stayed over the water. Most likely still being unaware that the jet was coming up from the south.
Another question before I bring in Eric, so we're going to talk a little bit about the weather conditions last night. And also, Eric, I want to hear your perspective here as well. But when it comes to piloting an aircraft like a Black Hawk helicopter in a an airspace, a shared airspace, right, where you're talking about, you have probably a lot of traffic going into Reagan, you probably have a lot of, I would imagine you're very aware of the aircraft in your airspace, right? Pilots are obviously trained to be extremely aware, but in these moments before this crash occurs, is the pilot relying more on line of sight or more on the instruments in the cockpit of the aircraft?
The pilot in this case is probably relying mostly on line of sight, looking outside. They're looking at the instruments it is dark, it's nighttime, to reference their altitude above the ground, their airspeed. But mostly in this area, there's a lot of cultural lighting, obviously, in a very urban environment. So they're mostly looking outside. They're scanning for traffic. We don't know. Potentially, they could have seen the lights of the aircraft, but confused them for ground lighting. And even though you can say, that's hard to believe, I've been in situations flying in an urban environment where the lights just blend together. And so it's not clear that what's an aircraft lighting, what is a building, what's a car on the road. You'd think it'd be very obvious, but I'm here to tell you, flying in an urban environment, those lights can blend.
Yeah, I mean, we're looking at it here. This is the moments before the crash, and you can see that bright light that you see in the center of the screen. That is the American Airlines flight, and then the smaller light to the left is the Black Hawk helicopter. So that you can clearly see, as Jim is talking about there's just an array of lights from the bridges here in the foreground, and of course we have buildings there in the background. You have just a lot of light coming from the ground. I guess it's just interesting to hear you describe, just in your words, how challenging is it to fly at this time of night when you have so much light coming from the ground and also such limited visibility because it's 9 o'clock at night?
I would say it's challenging. In some ways it's easier because you do have all the lighting. You can get a sense of how high above the ground you are. If you're instructed to stay over the river, it's very clear where the river is, because that's where the lights aren't. So you know where the river is that you fly that routing. Again, the biggest, and I think the thing to look at is that blending of lights. And the video, I think, could maybe, some people may look at the video and go, well, it looks like that light of the aircraft was extremely bright, and it doesn't look like any of the cultural lighting. But that could be the angle that the camera's looking at it. It could be the type of camera that this video uses. These things I don't know. I can say from experience, though, that the lights of an aircraft can easily look like lights that are on the ground or the cultural lighting.
Yeah. And again, folks, this is, if you're just joining us, this is the EarthCam video that shows the moment of the crash itself. A question here from YouTube Live, Facebook Live. We're going to tap into your questions as well, and then we're going to bring in Eric. Nicho in our comment section here says, #HeyJB, shouldn't there have been alarms in the control tower that these aircraft were inhibiting dangerously similar altitude? Why even reduce it to simple visual recognition at all? Does air traffic control, Jim, to Nicho's point here, does air traffic control play any role whatsoever when these two aircraft are getting so close? One being obviously military, the other being civilian.
Well, they did play a role, and there's audio that I pulled up, and probably the Nicho could pull up as well, that has the audio of the tower talking to the helicopter. and saying, advising the helicopter of the presence of the aircraft, and also directing the helicopter to pass behind the aircraft. Again, we don't know what the helicopter said back to him. Did the helicopter pilot say, "I have them in sight"? We don't know that, but the air traffic control was directly involved, as it should be in this situation, to direct the helicopter to see and avoid the CRJ aircraft coming into land at Reagan.
We appreciate the comment. We'll take in some more comments. Let's bring in Eric Kasnick, sticking around here for us from WSNN. Eric, why don't you just explain? You're a meteorologist, but then also too, you're a Navy veteran as well.
Yeah, correct. I got my start with meteorology in the Navy. I learned all about the weather and had all my training in the Navy there. And then afterwards, I studied some more in school, at grad school, and then I jumped up here at the WSNN. So yeah, it was a great launching pad for sure to get into this career. So
explain for us the weather last night, because the morning press conference, it was very clearly emphasized that the conditions last night were clear at Ronald Reagan Airport. What were how cold was it? What were the conditions? What were the winds like? What are you hearing?
From everything that I looked at, I don't see anything that outstanding jumps off the charts as something that was causing any type of issues. We had pretty clear sky conditions. The temperature was around 50 degrees. We're talking about a 9 p.m. at night. So not the most light in the world, but Jim mentioned that a lot of those lights can get mixed in and mixed together, and things can get confused. One thing that's important was unrestricted visibility. There's at least 10 miles of visibility that could be seen. So obviously that's going to be VFR versus visual flight rules versus instrument flight rules. So this was all being done, with people's vision and everything. But in terms of the weather, it was pretty neutral pressure, temperatures, nothing crazy. Wind speeds were about 16 miles an hour, sustained gusting at 26. Still nothing that, would down planes or anything. So just very interested to see how this investigation goes and see what everybody's role was in this.
So Jim, winds, how much can they be a factor when it comes to a situation like this? I mean, so Eric, you're not saying the winds were anything out of the ordinary, right?
No. I mean, there's usually turbulence with like wind shear, mountains, things like that. We didn't see any of that yesterday.
Is there anything possible with winds playing a factor in how this occurred, Jim?
I don't think so. Normally, when at least in the Air Force, now this will be a NTSB-led investigation with the Army and the FAA supporting it. But I've been involved in Air Force investigations. And normally up front, they look at the weather conditions, and they'll state up front if weather was or was not a factor. My sense in this accident that they'll talk about the weather conditions, they'll note the winds and the gusts, but they'll say weather was not a factor in the accident. Again, that's what I'm thinking will happen. But again, the investigation will play it as it does.
All right, so we got some other questions coming in here. Let's go to Lori. Garrett, this might be something that you can look up pretty quickly. Lori wants to know, #HeyJB, any idea the number of flights being managed in and out of D.C. on a daily basis? I mean, Reagan Airport is, I mean, Jim, maybe you can speak to this. It's a pretty unique airport, obviously, because it operates for so many different states, so many different people, whether you're from Maryland or Virginia or District of Columbia. It's serving a lot of different municipalities in the area. You also have the military component, the Pentagon obviously being right there as well. So I would say, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's certainly a unique airspace, a unique airport with a lot of travelers coming in and out from a passenger basis, right?
Oh, a huge number. I mean, you have Reagan Airport right there in D.C., and then you have Dulles Airport a little further out to the west that serve our nation's capital. Obviously, a huge amount of traffic coming into our nation's capital, both for business and personal reasons. And it all became even more interesting after 9/11 when the airspace was already fairly restricted and it became even more restricted. So there's very specific rules on how to fly in and around that airspace. You are under air traffic control when you do that. So yeah, it's busy, but again, there's the FAA has come up with the rules of the road, so to speak, to ensure that aircraft are deconflicted. And again, that's what's going to be a focus of this investigation, is what was the deviation that led to this accident.
Let's show everybody a live feed from the now recovery site. We just keep hearing about just how challenging these conditions are for the first responders. The waters of the Potomac are icy. You can actually see ice there off into the distance. And we're talking to just about frigid winds down there from what they're describing. It's extremely unpleasant of a situation and extremely challenging conditions for them to have to, deal with given the circumstances. Now, what's actually interesting about this spot in the river itself, we're hearing that this is about waist deep. So we're not talking about, submersibles needed to actually, retrieve wreckage, but still an extremely challenging set of circumstances for first responders. And there are too many agencies out there to even list them all, from my understanding, because of how unique of a spot it is in D.C. with Maryland, Virginia, government. I mean, the FBI has been involved, all of these different agencies sending out different first responders to aid and assist in the first rescue operation, now recovery operation. Garrett, any idea? Were you able to look up anything about the air traffic at Reagan? Because the airport, I believe, has reopened or was about to reopen at some point this morning.
I'm still looking for information, but preliminary numbers that I'm seeing are, hundreds of flights a day. Some are saying is up to 800. That is what we're looking at. We don't have any data from the past few months, but we're looking at the end of 2024.
Mayor Muriel Bowser said that the Reagan National Airport will be reopening for flights at 11 a.m. One of the things that stood out to me in the press conference too is that when flights do resume, Jim, they're going to be addressing this with passengers on flights that are coming in and out of the airport. I forget the name of the official who described it as still being the most safe airspace in the world. However, reassuring American travelers that everything is going to be okay, and that this was obviously an incident that was isolated to just this one particular set of an intersect between the Black Hawk and of this American Airlines flight. I mean, reassuring passengers is going to be a huge thing, because there's going to be tremendous unease for passengers now that are flying in and out of Reagan and really probably surrounding airports as well.
I would absolutely agree with him, though. I think that the U.S., the American airspace system and the airspace around Reagan National Airport and around the National Capital Region is extremely safe. Hundreds of, as Garrett just said, hundreds of flights go in there every day, and delivering, just millions of passengers, each year to and from our nation's capital. I think that passengers should be reassured. It is a terrible tragedy. It's understandable that it's going to be on people's minds. But I do agree that it's very safe airspace. I think people should rest assured that their flights will be going off in a normal fashion. I think that in some respects, there's going to be maybe even a heightened sense of awareness of what could happen in the flights that are in the immediate future. So I'll tell you what, I would get on a flight today at Tampa and fly into Reagan National Airport. I would have no qualms about it.
Again, a live picture here from the recovery site. I would imagine that the situation right now here is heartbreaking. Again, 28 bodies have already been recovered, but that means that there are likely north of 30 that are still in the process of being recovered at this hour. Eric, do you have any idea the conditions there right now? I mean, how you would describe the challenges for the recovery operation itself?
They're definitely going to be dealing with some cold, uncomfortable conditions for sure. And if that wind speed picks up, you're factoring in that wind chill, which could lead right into some hypothermia if some of those first responders aren't prepared adequately. they got to make sure they're taking care of themselves when they get into those frigid waters, because that's nothing to play around with at all. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the weather and for doing the actual search, I don't see any delays in that. I think that the sun is shining, so they could get on with that search. But yeah, I don't see anything crazy.
Briefing. President Trump is expected to speak, as well as Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy. He was the official that you mentioned earlier who said that this is still the safest airspace in the world.
Thank you.
So they're both expected to speak at roughly around 11 o'clock here out of the White House.
So let's bring up this question. It's, I have to carefully read through these questions to make sure that, of course, that we're staying on track. But, I thought of this too, Penny. I'm not going to lie. I think other people in our comment section have mentioned this as well. So, Jim, I'm going to throw this your way because I'm just curious from your perspective as to whether or not you think that there's anything to this. Penny says, "Hey, JB, this was a training exercise with the Black Hawk. Does that tell me that the pilot was not experienced? Just curious." And I would imagine that we don't have any detail. We don't know who the pilot of the Black Hawk is, obviously, yet. We are waiting, of course, for next of kin notification, I am sure, for everybody involved in this terrible incident. But that's, correct me if I'm wrong, that might be a misguided notion to say that the pilot of a Black Hawk flying in our nation's capital is not experienced because it's a training exercise, correct?
Correct. Yeah. First, a couple notes on that. First, because the airspace in the nation's capital is fairly crowded, and there are specific rules of the road, the pilots and the aviators and aircrew members that go to the units that fly in and around that space are normally very experienced. They have to learn, they have to have specific training on how to operate that area. So it would not be for a lack of training in how to operate in that area. Secondly, calling it a training exercise, military aviators are always doing training exercises. I flew military aircraft for the better part of 30 years of my military career. At some points, I was highly experienced instructor, evaluator, pilot in 2 different aircraft, and I was still doing training exercises. Training just means you're always honing your skills towards applying them in a combat scenario, if that's your role. So I would say that a training flight doesn't insinuate any lack of experience. It just means they're out there getting better at what they do, which is what we want.
Right. Just because you're training doesn't mean that you're already a highly accomplished, veteran pilot of the Navy, the Air Force, whatever it may be. To Ashley's comment here, also following up, a lot of people are honing in on this being referred to as a training flight, a training exercise. She says, if so, why was this allowed in such a high traffic fly zone and at night of all times to do so? Only curious. This is standard operating procedure, if you will, right, for that airspace, yes. Jim? So this has been going on for probably a very long time. It just so happened that we have a collision, a crash, where otherwise it hasn't occurred in the past.
Yes. Again, as you said earlier, JB, mostly because there was some deviation. But I would say that, night training in this airspace is extremely common. Now, was it to actually fly that routing, or was that routing just to get to and from the airport of origin to a training area somewhere else outside the airspace? That we don't know. We'll find out that as the investigation moves forward. But these types of flights, these types of training, proficiency, maybe a better word is proficiency flights, because you're always, as an aviator, you're always looking to get better at what you do. In the military, thankfully, the military spends a lot less time fighting war than we spend training for it. And we want, America wants its military aviators to be training constantly so that when they have to execute those combat taskings, they're well trained to do so.
We got some comments here, and this is part of the work we do, Jim. I know we didn't get a chance to really talk about this too much pre-stream, but interactive work when we try to answer people's questions and kind of set the record straight with experts such as yourself. There are some people out there who first off want to know, do we have any idea what altitude that they were at when the crash occurred, how high up they were off the ground, and then also too, whether or not any instrument interference could have been occurring, if any instruments could have malfunctioned for any reason whatsoever that would have misguided the pilots of either aircraft as to what was in the surrounding area, what was in that airspace at the time?
I'll say the instruments, very unlikely that had anything to do with it, because at that point, both aircraft aircrew their main instrument is their eyeball. They're looking outside. The aircraft is on short final to land, so they're focused on that. The helicopter's looking outside as well. The altitude is actually an excellent question, because the routings, they're not just lateral. It's not just, for the helicopter example, it's not just stay over the river, but it's also stay at a certain altitude, probably below a certain. Usually the helicopters that fly along the river need to stay below a certain altitude to ensure that deconfliction. So actually, the altitude question of where that helicopter was, that is something the investigation is going to be looking at.
Looking for some other comments. Again, for those of you just joining us on stream, we are waiting for the White House to begin their press briefing around. Itself, the NTSB with crash investigations, it's obviously quite. It's not. I wouldn't say common, but obviously the NTSB being the lead agency is pretty standard. Obviously for a crash like this, obviously this is a tragic occurrence with more than 60 people who are believed to be dead. When it comes to the complexities of this particular NTSB investigation, is this relatively, in your opinion, your expert opinion, is this a straightforward investigation? Is this complex? I know the technology has really advanced when it comes to flight recorders and precise location of each respective aircraft at the time of the collision. What was going on in each respective cockpit at the time? These factors, how much evidence do you think that they're going to have to work with? Is another follow-up question. I know I'm loading a lot of questions in here, but I mean, do they have to, the idea of a black box, right? Do they have to retrieve particular flight recorders from the aircraft in the river itself, whether it be from the helicopter or from the plane? How complex is this going to be for the NTSB going forward?
Well, there is going to be a level of complexity due to the fact, as you already noted, JB, that there's two aircraft. So when it's a single aircraft accident, you're just concentrating on that aircraft, that aircrew, the conditions that aircraft was experiencing. Now you've got to kind of factor two aircraft into that. There's some complexity, could be, you have multiple agencies that are involved. You have a civilian aircraft and a military aircraft, so that'll inject some complexities as well. But like you said, the NTSB, this is one of the main things they do. They have very well thought out and long executed procedures to do this, as does the military as well, if they're whenever they're in the lead of an accident investigation as well. The black box you talked about, the CRJ, the civilian aircraft, will unquestionably have a black box. And as you noted yourself, the water isn't that deep, so it should be recoverable and useful for information. And that'll have not just the flight parameters, but also the cockpit voice recorder as well. The military aircraft remains to be seen what type of gear that had in terms of a black box and a cockpit voice recorder. Some of the older helicopters, and the Black Hawk is, I mean, it's one of the mainstays of the U.S. Army, but it's been in the inventory for quite a while. So it remains to be seen if that has a black box or a cockpit voice recorder. So they may not have a lot of the information from that, but I can tell you, look, we have the video of two aircraft crashing. I mean, that's astonishingly rare. And with the level of experience of the investigators, and even aided by artificial intelligence tools that are available now that could be used to measure how high was the aircraft, how fast were they going, what was their heading as they were flying, they'll probably be able to determine a lot of these things. So that video by itself will probably provide a lot of information. Along with the eyewitness accounts, you're going to have the air traffic controller who is talking to the aircraft. So they'll be able to inject that as well. So there'll be plenty of information to be able to piece together what happened in due time.
Garrett, I saw that you have a comment, and I have a few questions in the queue as well. So what do you have?
Quick update. Apparently, the Army battalion that was involved in the crash where the Black Hawk helicopter flew out of, was involved with, has been grounded for 48 hours. That is according to I believe the defense chief, the Department of Defense, and noted that they're doing an investigation both from the Pentagon and the Army, both conducting separate investigations along with local authorities to determine whether the helicopter was flying in the right corridor and altitude. But that is currently happening now, the investigation, and they're on a 48-hour operational pause.
And JB, I will say, I mean, that's completely unsurprising for a couple reasons. One, again, to determine that the aircraft, again, that there was no anomalies in the training or with that air crew in terms of what they were doing that evening. But even more importantly, on a human level, you've got a unit, these units are not huge. And these aviators within the battalion, they know each other well. So three of their closest friends were killed last night. And on a human level, it's, and I've been the commander of units, and we've had accidents, and we normally did the same thing. We would do some downtime, 24 hours, 48 hours, just to let people sort of soak in what happened that night. Because aviation, you want people's head in the game when they're up there flying aircraft.
The defense secretary also added that this was a fairly experienced crew, and said that they were doing night evaluation. Is the way that they phrased it.
So let's get to Gemma's comment here again, folks. We got another 5 minutes with Jim before we have to let him go. And we have the White House press briefing starting at the top of the hour. So last call for your hashtag HeyJB or hashtag HeyJim or Garrett comments. Gemma says, how did the helicopter not see the plane in front of it? Jim, you spoke to that a little bit earlier, but I'd like to hop off of this comment a little bit and ask you this. If the helicopter or even the American Airlines flight did see each other in the final seconds, what type of evasive maneuvers were possible at the time? Obviously, for the chopper, you're going to have more maneuverability, but for the aircraft itself, with it being a relatively larger jet, how could the aircraft have maneuvered out of the way of the helicopter at that particular point in its descent?
The aircraft would have had a difficult time doing so. Like you said, not only is it a larger aircraft, but it's in the landing phase, which means it's going slow. It's got its gear hanging, its flaps hanging. It's really, you're flying just about 30% above your stall speed. So you just don't have a lot of maneuverability at that time. You're focused on landing the airplane in a safe manner. The helicopter would have more maneuverability. Again, looking at the video evidence, it's hard to see, but I don't see any evasive maneuvers. As Gemma says, and as we talked about before, she asked, as we talked about before, it's very possible that the cultural lighting, the helicopter could have seen the lights of the aircraft, but not recognized that they were lights of an aircraft in front of it, just mistaken them for ground or cultural lighting.
Let's see here. Well, yeah, I mean, yarn on, look, this is the question that everybody is asking, but I mean, as of right now, there's so much focus on the victims of this terrible, horrific tragedy that has occurred. The NTSB obviously is going to be answering this question of whose fault it was, but hopefully we will get some clarity in the coming hours. But we'll hopefully be able to focus a lot on the victims as the names start to get released after next of kin notifications are released. So we'll go to Molly here. How did the chopper not see the plane? I see a lot of questions similar to that. Christina, how did the would the plane's TCAS system pick up a helicopter? Jim?
I'll be honest, I'm not an expert on the TCAS system of a civilian aircraft. I would think that it would pick it up. But like I said, the aircraft would not have a lot of ability to maneuver. And it's possible they were talking the tower and they were aware of the helicopter's presence and they were looking for it. But possibly similar to the helicopter, not seeing the lights of the aircraft and confusing them for cultural lighting. The aircraft may have done the same thing. But for the aircraft at that phase of flight, they're just, I think, maybe a mile out from landing. That is the most critical phase of flight for an aircraft. So they are focused very, very clearly on making sure that they are staying on the approach, staying on the glide path at the right speed, at the right altitudes to execute a safe landing.
I see this question in the queue. I'd like to bring it up. Yeah, this is one final question we're going to get in from the chat before we let Jim have his final words. But Mr. Leadership, could this have been an autopilot error where the machine overrides manual efforts? Would the systems be able to have been remotely controlled? There's actually multiple questions in here, but during landing for the American Airlines flight, you correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, but it's a pretty manual process, bringing in the aircraft safely. And then for the helicopter, I would imagine, obviously a military helicopter is not really navigating on autopilot, correct?
Yeah, this is one I can pretty confidently say this is not an autopilot thing. The aircraft at that point, that close to the runway, they're hand flying it to get it down to the runway for a safe landing. I don't think the machine overrode anything. The helicopter really doesn't have an autopilot. I don't know the Black Hawk systems. I know the ones I flew. We had an altitude hold function, which we rarely use, quite honestly, because this is the nature of helicopter flying. It's very much a hands-on business.
And as for whether or not aircraft can be remotely controlled, the answer to that is I would imagine no, right?
Not in this case. I don't, you have two manned aircraft being flown by, it looks like either experienced or fairly experienced pilots. So I don't think that the remote control is really a factor here.
All right. Jim, any final words before we let you go? We get ready for the White House press briefing at 11 o'clock. We really appreciate your time. Any final words before we let you go?
I would say that, people keep watching the news. We're going to get pieces of news come out as they start working through the investigation. They're going to try to let the American people know what happened. There's a lot of interest in this. I would ask people to try to avoid, look, social media opens the opportunity to share thoughts and free speech is a wonderful thing, but I would ask people to kind of reserve judgment for all the what ifs. I don't want to foresee what the investigation is going to reveal, but it was a fairly clear night. The weather probably, some gusty winds probably wasn't a factor. We'll just have to see what happened that allowed this terrible tragedy to happen.
Jim Cardoso of USF, of course, joining us here on stream. Jim, we really appreciate your time and thank you so much.
Thank you for your time, JB. Appreciate the opportunity to help out.
All right, Jim. Thank you again from USF right here in Tampa. Good to have him on and bring on some invaluable expertise onto the live stream. We are now getting ready, obviously, for the White House press briefing at 11 o'clock. In fact, you see it there in the center of your screen. The moment that we have the opportunity to go to that and bring up full audio, we will. So we're keeping all eyes on it here in the Stream Center. We will bring up additional comments going forward. But first, I want to bring up what Garrett just sent my way. The figure skaters, correct, Garrett?
Correct.
Have been named so far as among the dead in this terrible crash, the American Airlines jet and Black Hawk helicopter with our nation's military colliding last night around 9 o'clock in our nation's capital. I'll read it here. It's Evgenia Shishkova and Vadim Naumov. Shishkova and Naumov are listed as professional pairs, pairs coaches on the website of the Skating Club of Boston. Their son, Maxim Naumov, is a competitive figure skater for the United States. Russian nationals confirming that Shishkova and Naumov were on the plane. The married couple were world champions in the 1990s and competed in the Winter Olympics twice. So we have 2 Olympians among the deceased.
The Skating Club of Boston also has apparently confirmed that, to the best of their knowledge, 14 skaters were returning home on that plane. So, those are just some of the names, but there will be more. There were some that were going to Kansas for a developmental camp, and some that were going to compete in the championship there in Wichita.
Yeah, absolutely, just jaw dropping. And you just one thing that you just really hope that there aren't children aboard the aircraft. That was where my mind went this morning when I first woke up, because I actually went to bed last night. I did not find out until early this morning when I woke up. I went to bed relatively early last night and found out about it all this morning. One of my first thoughts was I just hope that there were no kids aboard the aircraft. That was where my mind went initially. As we wait for the White House press briefing to occur, it looks like we are seeing some activity here on this shot. This is the recovery site, and we have seen various things occur. It's hard to see because one thing you can't tell from this shot is just how zoomed in it is. This is a really highly zoomed in picture. So, but we are seeing new activity on this shot, and we will come to it as much as possible. Garrett, anything new also that you are monitoring? Also, do we know who is expected to speak at the press briefing? It is our new press secretary, or is it going to be...
The reports that we have are that will be President Trump, as well as I have to pull the name back up again. I believe the new transportation secretary, Sean Duffy, might be his last name. I'm trying to get that right. Hold on.
And probably the most significant, no, without question, the most significant national address for President Trump in his first days in office. He took charge of the White House once again on the 20th, so earlier this month. This is his 10th day in office, and the first tragedy that is going to have obviously national and international attention. So he will be speaking to the American people, with so many of us just our hearts hurting for the 60-plus people, 64 people on the American Airlines flight, additional members of our nation's military aboard the Black Hawk, all believed to be dead. And
Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy is the other speaker, and he was confirmed less than a week ago. So this is obviously a big moment for him as well.
And we believe that will be starting here any moment. We will carry that live here across all channels and all platforms.
While we are waiting, there have been a few other names confirmed. Apparently, the members of the figure skating community that were lost in this crash they were members of a Massachusetts skating club. At least 6 of them were. And we have gotten some of them confirmed, including 2 teenage skaters and 2 of their parents. The teenage skaters were confirmed by the club as Spencer Lane and Gina Hahn. Their mothers, Christine Lane and Jin Hahn, were also involved.
So, yes, being told that this is still expected to happen in the 11 a.m. hour, or half hour rather, excuse me. Obviously, all the reporters here that are delivering live shots for their respective networks and affiliates will be sitting down the moment that the doors open to your left. We expect to see President Trump and others take to the stage, take to the podium here and deliver an address, and perhaps we get some new information. With the current expectation that everybody aboard is deceased, both aircraft, this would make it the deadliest U.S. air crash in nearly 24 years. And air travel, of course, is extraordinarily safe. But this is a story that, really applies to almost every American. if you've ever been on an aircraft before and you've taken off from a domestic airport here in our country, you know just how safe the process normally is. You know how you have the expectation of departing and landing and it being as smooth as possible. It's heartbreaking to think that this flight was in the final few minutes. The actual approach itself, landing gear down, coming in for landing at Reagan Airport when this collision occurred, and can't imagine how frightening it was for all involved. Obviously, we've seen the video and seen the EarthCam video of the collision occurring, and there was this big flash of light. Obviously, that is an explosion that occurred between the two aircraft colliding mid-air, and so it's terrifying to think of what those final seconds might have been like for those who were aware that something terrible had gone wrong. So we continue to monitor, obviously, the crash site, in addition to the White House press room where the press briefing, is going to be occurring. And let's bring you back here. And for those of you just joining us, if you haven't seen this video, it speaks for itself. I mean, there you can see in the center of your screen, we blew this up as much as possible to show everybody, but there you can see the big flash of light, the explosion that occurs. There's a puff of smoke afterwards, and then both aircraft. In fact, let's go full screen here. We could make it just a little bit larger. You can see both aircraft then plunge towards the Potomac. You have to imagine, of course, there were people that witnessed this from the ground. But truly terrifying that this could happen between a military aircraft and a passenger flight. Paying attention to the comment section, you can use hashtag HeyJB or hashtag HeyGarrett if you'd like to get our attention, and maybe you'd like to speak to the event itself or offer your prayers or ask a question, whatever it may be. If you use hashtag HeyJB or hashtag HeyGarrett, we can feature your comments interactively on screen. Let's see here. Army official says that they cannot confirm the helicopter crew was wearing night vision goggles at the time of the crash. So what kind of technology was used to aid the crew aboard the Black Hawk helicopter? When it comes to flying at night, obviously you're using line of sight, yes. You're using your instruments, yes. But what other technology is being used to aid the crew members to have the most visibility possible? No clarity there. And let's see here, reading some other updates that are coming in. Coast Guard is fully involved in the efforts that are going on right here as we go live to the crash site. So one thing I'd also like to bring up, one thing I'd like to show you, everybody, is the flight-aware flight path again. And let's I'd like to bring this up as large as possible. Okay, so you see the yellow/gold line that is coming from the top left-hand portion of the image. That is the Black Hawk helicopter's flight path. It's coming south down to the Potomac. It curves there right. I'm trying to figure out. I believe that curvature is related to the airspace itself, if I remember correctly. That the curvature is actually around that semicircle that you see. That initial deviation is for airspace reasons. And then it continues south down the Potomac. But if you see, and if we zoom in here, you know what? I'm going to try to just kind of manually zoom in here with this widget and show everybody what I'm talking about here. But really zoom in here. There you can see the military aircraft, the Black Hawk helicopter, then moving in a southwest direction. It was moving basically south, zigzagging somewhat south. This is something that we see with our helicopter, Eagle 8 HD, where a helicopter's flight path and a And a plane's flight path can deviate a bit, but it's more standard, obviously, especially for a plane that is landing like this, for the purple line, which is the American Airlines flight, to be more of a straight curvature versus the zigzagging a little bit that you see here, which is believed to be precise flight data from FlightAware from the tracking of the actual aircraft itself, zigzagging a bit down the Potomac. But there was obviously a bit of zigzagging going on, and then it zigs to the southwest. And excuse me, pardon my non-military lingo here and the non-military verbiage, but it does. It moves it makes a sudden southwest sort of deviation. Or is it a deviation, or was that the standard flight path? Was that the expectation for this training exercise? We do not know yet, but that is where the collision occurs. Was the aircraft supposed to continue flying directly south, or was this southwest turn part of the flight plan? Do not know, but it's very clear on screen here that this is where the intersect occurs.
JB, I've seen a few comments too suggesting or rather asking if air traffic control had even warned the helicopter about the plane or vice versa. AP is reporting that about 30 seconds or so before the crash, air traffic control did ask the helicopter if it could see the American Airlines flight. And a few moments later, another radio call went out asking telling the helicopter to pass behind the airliner. And then seconds later is when the collision happened. They had gotten no response from the Black Hawk prior to the collision in the interval couple of seconds that it took for them to, ask whether they were seeing the plane, and then the collision happening.
So let's get to some of the comments that are coming in. If you use, we're just going to isolate because there's so many comments coming in. Let's go to just hashtag Hey JB or Garrett. If you use just a hashtag for us, we can bring your comment on screen. I already see some comments about there has been no link to it being an act of terror in any way, shape, or form. This is believed to just be a military training exercise, having an unfortunate intersect with a flight that is landing at Reagan National Airport last night. Excuse me. There is no link to terrorism believed at this time, as in that is not part of the current where we are with this story. As I'm reading some others, excuse me. I actually wondered this as well. Trish is saying, if someone were to survive, is the water too cold for this to happen? Let's see what we can find out. Actually, Garrett, if you want to look up, we could try to both find out water temperatures at the Potomac right now. I'm sure that there are active gauges that are going to be able to tell us.
From what I can see here, water temperature, it's currently listed as about 42 degrees. Does that sound right?
Okay.
That seems
cold.
Seems cold.
Okay. I participated in a polar plunge last year. And if you've never been in water that cold or like an ice bath, I mean, it's debilitating, crippling cold. And so we'll go here live for the first responders that are still navigating these waters. I know it's only waist deep, but still these waters are frigid. You likely you would be able to survive in these waters. I don't know for how long. I would need obviously a doctor to tell me exactly how long you'd be able to survive in water, in the 40s like that. But let's put it this way: even if the plane goes down and by some miracle there are folks that are just injured and they aren't dead and they just have injuries. Let's say you have broken limbs, for example. You're not going to last very long in the waters if you're not able to get yourself up above the surface of the water and minimize the chilling cold's impact on your body. you're likely going to die of hypothermia pretty quickly if you're submerged in this water for too long. And so,
yeah, everything I'm seeing online, best estimates are anywhere between 30 minutes to an hour before you essentially lose
and I'm sure
muscle function.
I'm sure that's probably a big part of the reason why you had let's bring up the White House feed here. Actually, I hit the wrong feed. Let's bring up the White House feed. That's probably the reason why the first responders were rushing to get out there as quickly as possible, knowing that it was a race against the clock last night. If there were any survivors, if the plane went down in a way that there were, but to our understanding, with the nature of this crash, with the collision occurring as it did, as you saw there in the video from earlier, that there weren't any survivors when the plane went down. Now, is there still a chance that after the plane actually hit the Potomac that there were still survivors in there? I'm sure it's possible. We will find out more as the day unfolds and as the NTSB investigation becomes more clear for us, monitoring at home. Some other comments. Again, I can only see now if you use hashtag HeyJB in the comment section because I can't see all the comments coming in. They just come in too quickly. Yeah, John says you can get hypothermia. I don't know if you can get hypothermia in 72-degree water that quickly.
72 degree.
72-degree water?
That doesn't seem right.
Doesn't seem right at all.
I saw a comment saying 32 degree.
Maybe that might have been a typo there from John. Not telling you you're wrong, John, but might be wrong. See here.
Yeah, Nicole also mentioned 32 degrees.
Firestarter says, I'm sorry to interrupt. As a paramedic, you could survive for roughly 10 minutes or so, but after this long, you're. Oh, it looks like they're getting the heads up that this is going to be starting here momentarily. Let's put down the comment. Let's just go full screen and listen in for a moment. I think they were just tipped off. That was either a 1 minute or 2 minute warning. I'll read some other comments here in the meantime, just audibly. I'm seeing enough of this to at least point this out. Now, hey, JB, maybe the helicopter pilot had a heart attack or passed out. Maybe that's why he didn't respond. What about a medical emergency aboard the helicopter? A lot of people asking about, it's always possible to have a medical emergency. Now, obviously, our military is going to try to ensure that a pilot is in good enough health to be responsible for the life and lives of his or her crew members. But a medical emergency, I'm sure, is a possibility. Bottom line is people are getting this feeling that something happened, but we just don't know what that something is at this time. We might get some more answers with the White House press briefing when it actually does begin. The President of the United States is often privy to a lot of information before even some local or state officials on the ground are. Sometimes the President will get government intel well before even those that are more directly associated with the ongoing scene and the ongoing investigation. Sometimes there's just so much going on the ground with state and local officials that they don't get all the intel as quickly as they should because there's just so much back and forth that is going on with the actual ongoing recovery effort.
NBC is reporting that the defense secretary said that the crew at the helicopter were fairly experienced, as I mentioned before, and had night vision goggles.
And here is President Trump. Let's listen in.
I'd like to request a moment of silence for the victims and their families, please. Thank you very much. I speak to you this morning in an hour of anguish for our nation. Just before 9 p.m. last night, an American Airlines regional jet carrying 60 passengers and 4 crew collided with an Army Black Hawk helicopter carrying 3 military service members over the Potomac River in Washington, D.C., while on final approach to Reagan National Airport. Both aircraft crashed instantly and were immediately submerged into the icy waters of the Potomac. Real tragedy. The massive search and rescue mission was underway throughout the night, leveraging every asset at our disposal, and I have to say the local, state, federal, military, including the United States Coast Guard in particular, they've done a phenomenal job. So quick, so fast, it was mobilized immediately. The work has now shifted to a recovery mission. Sadly, there are no survivors. This was a dark and excruciating night in our nation's capital and in our nation's history, and a tragedy of terrible proportions. As one nation, we grieve for every precious soul that has been taken from us so suddenly, and we are a country of really, we are in mourning. This has really shaken a lot of people, including people, very sadly, from other nations who were on the flight. For the family members back in Wichita, Kansas, here in Washington, D.C., and throughout the United States and in Russia, we have a Russia contingent, some very talented people. Unfortunately, were on that plane. Very, very, very sorry about that. Whose loved ones were aboard the passenger jet. We can only begin to imagine the agony that you're all feeling. Nothing worse. On behalf of the First Lady, myself, and 340 million Americans, our hearts are shattered alongside yours, and our prayers are with you now and in the days to come. We'll be working very, very diligently in the days to come. We're here for you to wipe away the tears and to offer you our devotion, our love, and our support. There's great support. In moments like this, the differences between Americans fade to nothing compared to the bonds of affection and loyalty that unite us all, both as Americans and even as nations. We are one family, and today we are all heartbroken. We're all searching for answers. That icy, icy Potomac, it was a cold, cold night, cold water. We're all overcome with the grief for many who have so tragically perished, will no longer be with us. Together we take solace in the knowledge that their journey ended not in the cold waters of the Potomac, but in the warm embrace of a loving God. We do not know what led to this crash, but we have some very strong opinions and ideas, and I think we'll probably state those opinions now. Because over the years I've watched as things like this happen, and they say, well, we're always investigating, and then the investigation 3 years later, they announce it. We think we have some pretty good ideas. But we'll find out how this disaster occurred, and we'll ensure that nothing like this ever happens again. The FAA and the NTSB and the U.S. military will be carrying out a systematic and comprehensive investigation. Our new Secretary of Transportation, Sean Duffy, his second day on the job when that happened. It's a rough one. We'll be working tirelessly. He's a great gentleman. The whole group these are great people, and they are working tirelessly to figure out exactly what happened. We will state certain opinions, however. I'm also immediately appointing an acting commissioner to the FAA, Christopher Rocheleau, a 22-year veteran of the agency, highly respected. Christopher, thank you very much. Appreciate it. We must have only the highest standards for those who work in our aviation system. I changed the Obama standards from very mediocre at best to extraordinary. You remember that. Only the highest aptitude, they have to be the highest intellect and psychologically superior people were allowed to qualify for air traffic controllers. That was not so prior to getting there. When I arrived in 2016, I made that change very early on because I always felt this was a job that, and other jobs too, but this was a job that had to be superior intelligence, and We didn't really have that, and we had it. And then when I left office and Biden took over, he changed them back to lower than ever before. I put safety first. Obama, Biden, and the Democrats put policy first. And they put politics at a level that nobody's ever seen, because this was the lowest level. Their policy was horrible, and their politics was even worse. So as you know, last week, long before the crash, I signed an executive order restoring our highest standards for air traffic controllers and other important jobs throughout the country. So it was very interesting. About a week ago, almost upon entering office, I signed something last week that was an executive order, very powerful, on restoring the highest standards of air traffic controllers and others, by the way. Then my administration will set the highest possible bar for aviation safety. We have to have our smartest people. It doesn't matter what they look like, how they speak, who they are. It matters intellect, talent, the word talent. They have to be talented, naturally talented geniuses. You can't have regular people doing that job. They won't be able to do it. But we'll restore faith in American air travel. I'll have more to say about that. I do want to point out that various articles that appeared prior to my entering office, and here's one. The FAA's diversity push includes focus on hiring people with severe intellectual and psychiatric disabilities. That is amazing. And then it says FAA says people with severe disabilities are most underrepresented segment of the workforce, and they want them in, and they want them, they can be air traffic controllers. I don't think so. This was in January 14th, so that was a week before I entered office. They put a big push to put diversity into the FAA's program. Then another article, the Federal Aviation Administration, this was before I got to office, recently, second term. The FAA is actively recruiting workers who suffer severe intellectual disabilities, psychiatric problems, and other mental and physical conditions under a diversity and inclusion hiring initiative spelled out on the agency's website. Can you imagine? These are people that are, I mean, actually, their lives are shortened because of the stress that they have. Brilliant people have to be in those positions, and their lives are actually shortened, very substantially shortened, because of the stress, where you have many, many planes coming into one target, and you need a very special talent and a very special genius to be able to do it. Targeted disabilities are those disabilities that the federal government, as a matter of policy, has identified for special emphasis in recruitment and hiring. The FAA's website states they include hearing, vision, missing extremities, partial paralysis, complete paralysis, epilepsy, severe intellectual disability, psychiatric disability, and dwarfism all qualify for the position of a controller of airplanes pouring into our country, pouring into a little spot, a little dot on the map, a little runway. The initiative is part of the FAA's diversity and inclusion hiring plan. Think of that. The initiative is part of the FAA's diversity and inclusion hiring plan, which says diversity is integral to achieving FAA's mission of ensuring safe and efficient travel. I don't think so. I don't think so. I think it's just the opposite. The FAA website shows that the agency's guidance on diversity hiring were last updated on March 23rd of 22. They wanted to make it even more so. And then I came in, and I assume maybe this is the reason. The FAA, which is overseen by Secretary Pete Buttigieg, a real winner. That guy's a real winner. Do you know how badly everything's run since he's run the Department of Transportation? He's a disaster. He was a disaster as a mayor. He ran his city into the ground, and he's a disaster now. He's just got a good line of bullshit. The Department of Transportation, his government agency charged with regulating civil aviation. Well, he runs it 45,000 people, and he's run it right into the ground with his diversity. So I had to say that it's terrible. Then it's a group within the FAA, another story, determined that the workforce was too white, that they had concerted efforts to get the administration to change that and to change it immediately. This was in the Obama administration just prior to my getting there. And we took care of African Americans, Hispanic Americans. We took care of everybody at levels that nobody's ever seen before. It's one of the reasons I won. But they actually came out with a directive, too white. And we want the people that are competent. But now we mourn and we pray and would like to ask all Americans to join me in a moment of silence as we ask God to watch over those who have lost their lives and bring comfort to the loved ones. And I just want to say God bless everyone in this room. This has been a terrible, very short period of time. We'll get to the bottom of it. So we all saw the same thing. We've seen it many times. I've had the honor of hearing tapes. Tapes are scary, very scary tapes. You had a airliner coming in, American Airlines. He was doing everything right. He was on track. He was the same track as everybody else. They came in. It's probably the same track as they've had for 25 years or more. He's coming in the path. And for some reason, he had a helicopter that was at the same height, obviously when they hit, but pretty much the same height, and going at an angle that was unbelievably bad. When the air traffic controller said, "Do you see?" He was talking about, "Do you see him?" But there was very little time left when that was stated. And then also he said, "Follow him in." And then almost immediately after that, seconds after that, there was the crash that took place. Well, you follow him in, that means like everything's fine. Follow him in. You had a pilot problem from the standpoint of the helicopter. I mean, because it was visual. It was a very clear night. It was cold, but clear, and clear as you could be. The American Airlines plane had lights blazing. They had all of their landing lights on. I could see it from the Kennedy Center tape. We had a tape up on the Kennedy Center. That seems to be the primary. Thus far, I'm sure we'll see other tapes because it's such an area where there are a lot of cameras looking up into the air, into space. So we'll probably see many other shots of it before too much time goes by. But we had a situation where you had a helicopter that had the ability to stop. I have helicopters. You can stop a helicopter very quickly. It had the ability to go up or down. It had the ability to turn. And the turn it made was not the correct turn, obviously. It did somewhat the opposite of what it was told. We don't know that that would have been the difference because the timing was so tight. It was so little. There was so little time to think. But what you did have is you had vision. The helicopter had vision of the plane because you had vision of it all the way, perfect vision of it all the way from at Kennedy Center where the tape was taken. And for some reason, there weren't adjustments made. Again, you could have slowed down the helicopter substantially. You could have stopped the helicopter. You could have gone up. You could have gone down. You could have gone straight up, straight down. You could have turned. You could have done a million different maneuvers. For some reason, it just kept going and then made a slight turn at the very end, and by that time it was too late. They shouldn't have been at the same height, because if it was at the same height, you could have gone under it or over it, and nobody realized, or they didn't say that it's at the same height. At the same height, still wouldn't have been great, but you would have missed it by quite a bit. Could have been 1,000 feet higher. It could have been 200 feet lower, but it was exactly at the same height, and somebody should have been able to point that out. So all of this is going to be studied, but it just seems to me, from a couple of words that I like to use, the words common sense, some really bad things happened. and some things happened that shouldn't have happened. So you had a helicopter going in an identical direction. You had a helicopter that was at the exact same height as somebody going in essentially the opposite direction. You had a plane that was following a track, which is a track that every other plane followed. And I don't imagine, I know I've heard today that they might have been following the preceding plane, which was pretty close, but not that close, the preceding plane. But you wouldn't have even been able to see that because of the direction that the helicopter was coming in at. So you had a confluence of bad decisions that were made. And you have people that lost their lives, violently lost their lives. We're going to take a few questions. I'd like to ask our new Secretary of Transportation to say a few words. Sean Duffy, great gentleman, just started. It's not your fault, and I know you agree with me very strongly on intellect and even psychological well-being of the air traffic control. It's such an important position, and I think I can't emphasize stronger. I changed it when I first ran in 2016. I changed it. We had the highest standard that you could have. And then they changed it back. That was Biden to a standard I read it to you. That was from one of your papers. One of the people in this room actually wrote that. And then I changed it back a few days ago. And unfortunately, that was, we'll see. We don't know that necessarily it's even the controller's fault. But one thing we do know, there was a lot of vision, and people should have been able to see that, you know, at what point do you stop? At what point do you say, wow, that plane's getting a little bit close? So this is a tragedy that should not have happened. Please, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I would just note the President's leadership has been remarkable during this crisis. We have had a whole of government response, local, state, federal. And when you see that kind of cooperation, it begins with the leadership in this body. So thank you for that, Mr. President. You make our jobs a lot easier. You made an important point that when we deal with safety, we can only accept the best and the brightest in positions of safety that impact the lives of our loved ones, our family members. And I think you make a really important point on that, Mr. President. That is the motto of your presidency: the best and the brightest, the most intelligent coming into these spaces. I want to take a moment and extend my condolences to the families of the loved ones. We commit to them that we are going to get to the bottom of this investigation, not in 3 years, not in 4 years, but as quickly as possible, with the NTSB, who is here today, as well as the FAA. What happened yesterday shouldn't have happened. It should not have happened. And when Americans take off in airplanes, they should expect to land at their destination. That didn't happen yesterday. That's not acceptable. And so we will not accept excuses. We will not accept passing the buck. We are going to take responsibility at the Department of Transportation and the FAA to make sure we have the reforms that have been dictated by President Trump in place to make sure that these mistakes do not happen again. And again, I want to thank you for your leadership, Mr. President, and I appreciate the confidence you placed in me. Thank you.
Pete would like to say something.
Well, thank you, Mr. President. Again, I want to echo what the Transportation Secretary said about your leadership. From the moment we found out about this, we were in contact with the White House trying to determine exactly what happened. I would echo it as well. No excuses. We're going to get to the bottom of this. We first and foremost, from the Defense Department, want to pass our condolences to the 64 souls and their families that were affected by this. Never should happen. And certainly the 3 service members, the 3 soldiers, a young captain, staff sergeant, and a CW2, Chief Warrant Officer, on a routine annual retraining of night flights on a standard corridor for a continuity of government mission. The military does dangerous things. It does routine things on the regular basis. Tragically, last night, a mistake was made. And I think the president is right. There was some sort of an elevation issue that we have immediately begun investigating at the DOD and Army level. Army CID is on the ground investigating. Top-tier aviation assets inside the DoD are investigating, sir, to get to the bottom of it so that it does not happen again, because it's absolutely unacceptable. But I want to echo what the Transportation Secretary and you, Mr. President, said, because it pertains to the DoD as well. We will have the best and brightest in every position possible. As you said in your inaugural, it is colorblind and merit-based. The best leaders possible, whether it's flying Black Hawks and flying airplanes, leading platoons, or in government. The era of DEI is gone at the Defense Department, and we need the best and brightest, whether it's in our air traffic control, or whether it's in our generals, or whether it's throughout government. So thank you for your leadership and courage on that, sir, and we'll stand by you on it. Thank you.
Very much. JD, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. President, for your leadership. I just want to reemphasize something the President said, and you've heard from the Secretary of Transportation and of Defense. There really was a whole of government response. We were all on the phone. We were all communicating yesterday, trying to get to the bottom of this immediately, but also try to communicate with the American people about what happened. Something the President said that I think bears reemphasizing, which is that when you don't have the best standards in who you're hiring, it means, on the one hand, you're not getting the best people in government, but on the other hand, it puts stresses on the people who are already there. And I think that is a core part of what President Trump is going to bring and has already brought to Washington, D.C., is we want to hire the best people because we want the best people at air traffic control, and we want to make sure we have enough people at air traffic control who are actually competent to do the job. If you go back to just some of the headlines over the past 10 years, you have many hundreds of people suing the government because they would like to be air traffic controllers, but they were turned away because of the color of their skin. That policy ends under Donald Trump's leadership because safety is the first priority of our aviation industry. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, on DEI and the claims that you've made, are you saying this crash was somehow caused and the result of diversity hiring? And what evidence have you seen to support these claims?
It just could have been. We have a high standard. We've had a much higher standard than anybody else. And there are things where you have to go by brain power, you have to go by psychological quality. And psychological quality is a very important element of it. These are various very powerful tests that we put to use, and they were terminated by Biden. And Biden went by a standard that's the exact opposite. So we don't know, but we do know that you had two planes at the same level. You had a helicopter and a plane. That shouldn't have happened. And we'll see. We're going to look into that, and we're going to see. But certainly for an air traffic controller, we want the brightest, the smartest, the sharpest. We want somebody that's psychologically superior, and that's what we're going to have. Yeah.
Mr. President.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Mr. President, you mentioned at the top of the briefing that there were several Russian nationals on the flight.
Yes.
Will the U.S. government be willing to facilitate the transfer of their remains, considering the fact there is no direct air travel between the two countries?
We've already been in contact with Russia, and the answer is yes, we will facilitate. Yes. Please, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. The situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo is getting worse, even though President John Lorenzo has been mediating the conflict between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo because he wants to bring peace and stability. The situation is really bad right now. I want to hear from Ms. President if you have any plan in the future to bring peace in the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
You're asking me a question about Rwanda, and it is a very serious problem, I agree, but I don't think it's appropriate right now to talk about it, but it is a very serious problem.
Mr. President, we don't even yet know the names of the 67 people who were killed, and you are blaming Democrats and DEI policies and air traffic control and seemingly the member of the U.S. military who was flying that Black Hawk helicopter. Don't you think you're getting ahead of the investigation right now?
No, I don't think so at all. I don't think with the names of the people, you mean the names of the people that are on the plane? You think that's going to make a difference?
Does it comfort their families?
They are a group of people that have lost their lives. If you want a list of the names, we can give you that. We'll be giving that very soon. We're in coordination with American Airlines. We're in coordination very strongly, obviously, with the military. But I think that's not a very smart question.
But are you
I'm surprised coming from you.
Are you blaming
please.
Thank you, President Trump. Thank you for being here. Based on your analysis so far, do you have a sense of who was at fault, if it was the plane, the helicopter, air traffic control, and can you assure people that it is safe to fly in and out of D.C.?
Well, I've given you the analysis, and the analysis was, it was based on vision. You had a lot of people that saw what was happening. You had some people that knew what was happening. There was some warnings, but the warnings were given very, very late. You know, those warnings were given very late. It was almost as they were given, a few seconds later, there was a crash. It should have been brought up earlier. But the people in the helicopter should have seen where they were going. I can't imagine people with 20/20 vision not seeing, you know, what's happening up there. Again, they shouldn't have been at the same height. You're going in reverse directions or sideways directions. Obviously, you want to be at different heights. I see it all the time when I'm flying. You have planes going in the opposite. They're always lower, we're higher, or so if somehow there's a screw up, there's not going to be a tragedy. It'll be close, but you know, there's never going to be a tragedy if you're at a different elevation. For whatever reason, they were at the same elevation. And also, from the American Airlines Center, he's along the track that every plane is along. You say, what was a helicopter doing in that track? It's very sad. But visually, somebody should have been able to see and taken that helicopter out of play. And they should have been at a different height.
Thank you, sir. You mentioned the Russians that were on board that plane. What other nationalities were on board that passenger?
There were a couple of others. We're going to be announcing it in about an hour. We have some very specific information. We're calling the countries. We've spoken to most of them, but there were some other countries represented.
Mr. President, have you spoken to President Putin?
I have not, no.
Mr. President, on your executive
Not about this.
On your executive order, you've already issued an executive order. You say will restore aviation safety.
Right.
This crash happened after that. Was the executive order successful, and what more needs to change to keep people safe?
Well, you know, we issued it 3 days ago, and we're in the process of making those changes. This is something that should have been done a long time ago. Actually, my original order should have never been changed, and I think maybe you wouldn't have had this problem. Maybe. Yeah, please, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. We see like everyday life that very often those diversity hires cause sometimes issues, as you just mentioned. So what plan do you have? Are we going to see some fire? Are you going to fire some of those diversity hires in the federal government? What plan do you have?
I would say the answer is yes. If we find that people aren't mentally competent, you see the language. The language is put out by them. And if you see that, I'm not going to bore you by reading it again, but these are not people that should be doing this particular job. They'd be very good for certain jobs, but not people that should be doing this particular job.
Mr. President, you have today blamed the diversity elements, but then told us that you weren't sure that the controllers made any mistake. We then said perhaps the helicopter pilots were the ones who made the mistake.
It's all under investigation.
I understand that. That's why I'm trying to figure out how you can come to the conclusion right now that diversity had something to do with this crash.
Because I have common sense, okay? And unfortunately, a lot of people don't. We want brilliant people doing this. This is a major chess game at the highest level. When you have 60 planes coming in during a short period of time, and they're all coming in different directions, and you're dealing with very high-level computer work and very complex computers. And one of the other things I will tell you is that the systems that were built, I was going to rebuild the entire system, and then we had an election that didn't turn out the way it should have. But they didn't build the systems properly. They spent a lot of money renovating a system, spending much more money than they would have spent if they bought a new system for air traffic controllers, meaning the computerized systems. There are certain companies that do a very good job. They didn't use those companies. They used companies that should not have been doing it. No, I think it's very important to understand that for some jobs, and not only this, but air traffic controllers, they have to be at the highest level of genius. Okay.
I want to ask you about the ice skaters in a moment because the U.S. Ice Skating Committee was affected. But first, if I can, the cited FAA text that you read is real, but the implication that this policy is new or that it stems from efforts that began under President Biden or the Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg is demonstrably false. It's been on the FAA's
Who said
website.
that, you?
No, it's on the website, the FAA's website. It was there in 2013. It was there for the
Take a look.
entirety.
What I read.
It was there for the entirety of your administration
Nice and
too.
easy.
So my question is, why didn't you change the policy during your first
I
administration?
did change it. I changed the Obama policy, and we had a very good policy. And then Biden came in, and he changed it. And then when I came in 2 days, 3 days ago, I signed a new order, bringing it to the highest level of intelligence. Okay.
It was on the website.
Please.
Respectfully, it was on the website.
Quiet.
Thank you, Mr. Welcome back to the. I'm sorry. You mentioned that a vision was probably the problem that was at issue in this crash. There's been some reports that one of the pilots in the helicopter may have been using night vision equipment. Was there any
I heard
indication?
that. We don't know. We're going to know that pretty soon. It may change your view plane if you do have the night vision. So it's very possible that could have happened. That would be maybe a reason why you wouldn't actually see as well as on a clear night. You can see sometimes better without it. I have a couple of more.
Mr. President, is it helpful to have your Secretary of Transportation confirmed, and does this intensify your interest in getting other nominees confirmed quickly?
Go to what?
Is it helpful to have your Secretary of Transportation confirmed, and does this intensify your interest in getting other nominees confirmed quickly as well?
Well, sure. We want fast confirmations. And the Democrats, as you know, are doing everything they can to delay them. They've taken too long. We're struggling to get very good people that everybody knows are going to be confirmed, but we're struggling to get them out faster. We want them out faster. It's a good question, actually. We've been pushing Sean. Everyone knows Sean for a long time. He got many, many Democrat votes, but they want to take as long as they can. They ask questions like some of the questions that Peter would ask that were totally irrelevant and not very good questions, but they want to just keep it going. They want to keep it going as long as possible. I was very honored, actually, that you got so many Democrat votes. That was really good. That was really good.
When I apply to meet with the families, and second question, is it your impression that military training that was done during that time?
The what?
The training that the helicopter was involved in. Is it anything you can tell us about
You
that?
don't know. These are the things that will come up with the investigation. You don't know. But the helicopter obviously was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and a tragedy occurred. Please.
Thank you, Mr. President.
I've got a question about the.
No, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. You've been critical of the current regulations, and you've called for big reforms at FAA. I'm curious, sir.
I made the reforms, actually.
What is your message?
3 days ago, I made them.
Yes, sir. What is your message then to the American public in the weeks and months ahead? Should they feel hesitant to fly? And if you could clarify perhaps something that the Defense Secretary said when he said that this helicopter was on a continuity of government mission?
I don't know what that refers to, but they were practicing. They do that. They call it practicing, and they were. And that's something that should be done. It's only continuity in the sense that we want to have very good people, and that has to be in continuity, and that's what they refer to. But it was basically practice, and it was a practice that worked out very, very badly. Okay?
On his question, the first question, should people be hesitant to fly right now?
No, not at all. I've not hesitated to fly. This is something that it's been many years that something like this has happened, and the collision is just something that we don't expect ever to happen again. We are going to have the highest level people. We've already hired some of the people that you've already hired for that position long before we knew about this. I mean, long before. From the time I came in, we started going out and getting the best people because I said it's not appropriate what they're doing. I think it's a tremendous mistake. You know, they like to do things and they like to take them too far, and this is sometimes what ends up happening. Now, with that, I'm not blaming the controller. I'm saying there are things that you could question, like the height of the helicopter, the height of the plane being at the same level and going in opposite directions. It's not a positive. But no, we're already hiring people. No, flying is very safe. We have the safest flying anywhere in the world, and we'll keep it that way. Thank you all very much. Thank you very much,
President Donald Trump, his first briefing from the White House press briefing room since he took office for the second time just 10 days ago. Not too much new information on this particular from this particular press conference. We've, of course, been going through a lot of what President Trump had to say. If there's one thing that is very clear is that based on what President Trump has heard thus far, is that the pilot of the American Airlines flight, as it was making its descent into Reagan National Airport, was proceeding on the correct flight path, and the military chopper pilot was the one that was at the incorrect altitude and collided with the American Airlines flight. Now, when pressed for evidence or reasoning as to how the president came to that conclusion, whether it was a particular advisor or a document or something that he had heard, or why he is so firmly in the belief right now that that is the reason for the crash, he did not say. He said the words common sense as to why that it might be that might be the reason for the crash itself. Also pointing to DEI as potential influence in the actual crash itself. I think for everyone watching at home, we'll have to, of course, find out a whole lot more about the circumstances of the crash itself. Who was the crew aboard the Black Hawk helicopter? The crew in the cockpit of the plane itself. More of the particulars. We're so early in this process right now with finding out what has happened just last night that we are, of course, very, very receptive to what President Trump has to say, but without any tangible details and evidence to point to, it's very difficult to say how the president came to the conclusion that he did. So right now, I mean, I'm sure that next of kin notifications are still taking place or have taken place this morning. You heard the president mention that the list of names or more information will be released in the coming hour. As we understand it, the NTSB will be carrying a briefing. They will be hosting a briefing at some point. And the NTSB, being the lead investigative agency in the crash, will be, of course, releasing more information if they have more information to release at the time of the briefing itself. Let's kill the audio. That's the White House press feed. We'll bring you back to the crash site itself and show everybody what is going on there. Obviously, a tragic scene. This is where 67 people lost their lives. President Trump confirming that all 67 are dead as a result of this crash that occurred around 9 o'clock last night in the airspace of Reagan National Airport. So we'll try our very best to answer some questions before we wrap up our live stream. But let me point out something that we were talking about a little bit before President Trump stepped up to the podium, and it has to do with this. Here's that the flight path, the flight data from FlightAware, which again monitors the tracking data of the respective aircraft. You can see, as President Trump noted, this is the lane, if you will, that just about every aircraft landing on that runway at Reagan National Airport is going to use, coming from the south, making the landing at you can actually see the runway there in the top left-hand portion of the image. That is extraordinarily standard. The flight path for the chopper, the actual Black Hawk helicopter in question here, you can see the gold line that appears to be zigging and zagging a little bit. It's unclear right now whether or not that turn to the southwest is responsible for the crash, or whether or not it's strictly altitude or a combination of both. It's very possible, by the way, everybody, that turn to the southwest was absolutely part of the flight plan and routine for the military training exercise that the Black Hawk was performing. It just so happened to be at the wrong altitude. If these two lines intersect and you have the military chopper at an altitude of, let's say, 3,200 feet, and you have the plane at, let's say, 1,600 feet, these two lines will intersect without problem. There's just one aircraft flying over the other. This is a 2D map. We don't have a 3D image, obviously, here. All we have is 2D data, the geolocation map data that we have here on the center of your screen, it does not show altitude. So we don't know if this turn to the southwest was procedural, part of this military training exercise as it's been conducted in the past, or whether or not that is the deviation that it caused this flight to, or caused the collision to occur, or whether or not it's strictly an altitude problem. But based on all indications and based on everything that we have read and based on what President Trump just said, the purple line, which is the American Airlines flight, making its land or coming in to land at Reagan National Airport, this is completely standard. And if you did the last, 500, flight aware track data, mappings for that particular flight pattern landing at Reagan National Airport at that runway coming in from the south, it would probably all be almost exactly on that purple line. It's really how you would land the aircraft at that runway at that airport. So it's really comes down to what was the chopper doing at that altitude and what was the chopper doing at that moment and at that point on the map. And that's what we just don't know right now. Waiting, of course, for the NTSB to announce when their briefing is. You haven't seen anything about when the briefing is. I've been looking for the last 20 minutes. I don't see anything just yet.
No, just that they are planning one eventually. Who knows what time at this point. The updates that we have gotten, mostly coming in, like you said, that were mentioned in the press conference with President Trump. He talked about, there was a question from a reporter regarding night vision goggles, and just before we tuned in to the presser, we did get confirmation from the defense secretary that the crew of the Black Hawk helicopter was outfitted with night vision equipment. Question whether that played into this at all. A lot of questions that we are still having that we will not really have answers to until these investigations start to wrap up and we start getting more info.
Yeah, night vision goggles are you ever worn them?
I have.
Yeah, they're interesting because based on the settings now, and you can obviously adjust night vision goggles, right? There's a lot of light. I know that sounds crazy, but there's still going to be a lot of light at the altitude in which the helicopter was. And we know because there's video of the crash. In fact, we'll show that to you now. So night vision goggles, if the adjustments are made appropriately, you'll be able to have better vision even with this amount of light. But whether or not it would have been standard for them to be wearing night vision goggles at that altitude, at that point in the training exercise, whether or not it was part of the training exercise, that to me is really
and as we've talked
unclear.
about before, in a rural area, not rural, a very congested area, I guess, where there's a lot of light pollution, and as you mentioned, night vision goggles, they help you see better in the dark, but, if there's light around, we had talked previously with Jim Cardoso, the expert we had on at the beginning of the stream, where he talked about how sometimes with the light pollution, you might mistake the plane's lights for a building or for a car. I imagine if you're wearing night vision goggles, if you're flying over the river trying to see better, I imagine that might make it even harder to distinguish an aircraft's lights from that of a plane, of a vehicle.
And then also too, we're not talking about night vision goggles that you would buy, at your local
consumer,
your local Bass Pro Shops or
right.
something like that. We're talking about military night vision goggles that probably are state of the art. So imagine that if the trained servicemen and women of our nation's military are wearing them in a training exercise aboard a Black Hawk helicopter, that they are optimized to be able to see and balance both light and darkness. It's just an interesting and a curious observation as to whether or not they were wearing night vision goggles at the time and whether it's really standard for them to be doing so for this particular training exercise. There's a lot, obviously, to comb through. What I do want to show you, we're going to be wrapping up our stream here momentarily, but what I do want to show you, folks, this is actually a really interesting live camera. This is in the foreground what you are going to see. If we stay on this shot long enough, and I just had it about 90 seconds ago, in the foreground is the runway for the airport itself. So if we stay on the shot long enough, you will see planes taking off and landing at Reagan National Airport. In the background, that's the Potomac, and that is the crash site. The crash site that if I hit the touchscreen and go to here, you can see zoomed in. two different cameras coming from almost the same place, but here you can see the wide shot. And yes, as of 11 o'clock this morning, flights have resumed at Reagan National Airport, and it's I don't want to say normal there. There's probably nothing that's going to be normal there for some time. There are still announcements going to be made on all the flights into and out of Reagan, but
and I imagine
addressing what
unease.
happened.
I mean,
Unease and tension and but as President Trump and others have assured the American public that it is safe to fly, whether it be in our nation's capital or elsewhere in the country, that this is an isolated incident that occurred last night for, again, an unclear reason. We all signs right now are pointing to the military aircraft being out of position and not in the right place at the right time. However, why the military aircraft was that close enough to collide with the American Airlines flight while it was landing, that remains unclear. That's something that we still don't know as to why the military aircraft was where it was at the time. There's a what's that? Is that a I think
train,
that's actually a train in our foreground. Yeah. So here's another just interesting thing about that, and we'll go to some comments here. Any final hashtag HeyJB questions or comments, we'll take them in the comments section on Facebook Live, YouTube Live. But here's the thing. I find it very interesting what Jim said. When I've been in a helicopter. I actually used to be a helicopter reporter at a previous station where I was in a chopper 3 times a week over the duration of that assignment when I was at a CBS affiliate in the Northeast. And so I was in a helicopter a lot. Helicopter pilots, many of them, of course, having military backgrounds, they are trained to be able to maneuver the aircraft and do so very, very quickly if the sudden need arises. And I've been in a helicopter once or twice where a chopper pilot has had to maneuver very, very quickly on the stick to get out of the way or to nothing dangerous, but just maneuvering quickly enough. What I'm getting at is that there's tremendous maneuverability in a helicopter. Most helicopters, you're going to be able to maneuver quite freely in the air. I found it very interesting to hear from Jim Cardoso over at USF, who said that where the plane was at the time and where it was in its landing cycle, where it was with the landing gear being down, flaps up, everything, the maneuverability of the plane was limited to none based on where it was in relation to landing at Reagan, which means that if the pilot of the plane did see the chopper coming at them, that there was almost nothing that the pilot could have done to maneuver out of the way. It's going so slow and flying so low and has such limited maneuverability with the wheels and flaps that you're just not able to really get out of the way. So it's frightening to think about. If the pilot of the American Airlines flight saw what was happening before it actually transpired, if they saw the collision coming. I see some non-hashtag comments in our comment section. Don't they rely heavily on the control tower? Of course they do. And the control tower is going to make, they're going to advise the pilots of each respective aircraft as to what is in the surrounding area. But without enough notice, nothing is going to be able to give you more warning than your own 2 eyes. And so the air traffic control is always going to be deemed as a fail-safe, a support system. It's not going to be able to take control of the aircraft or guide a pilot away from. I'll show you everybody a plane here in the foreground. And look left real quick. There you can see the tail of a plane that's taking off at Reagan. The air traffic control is going to be able to assist. And oftentimes they can, I would imagine, help out a pilot enough to avoid immediate danger, but they can only do so much from where they are in the control tower itself. Garrett, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, I think that the next step in this obviously is to let the investigations play out. Let's see what they get back to us with. As far as more information comes, you know, a big question is going to be, there's that report about the air traffic controller and the attempts that it made to contact the Black Hawk helicopter prior to the collision, and basically getting radio silence from the other end. I wonder, was it too late? You know, was there a malfunction with the communication system? Who knows what it could be, but that's, I think, going to be the most interesting part of the investigations, is what happened there with that air traffic communication breakdown.
Yeah, I'm curious to, you know, Jim said it was very, very unlikely that instruments had anything to do with it. Right now, the prevailing sort of theory that has emerged from the White House press briefing, from people talking even in our comment section on social media, elsewhere on social media, the belief is pilot error. But we haven't heard anything from the NTSB. Is a technological breakdown or a mechanical breakdown to blame? Is there a communication breakdown, something that occurred? We really do not know until we hear from the NTSB. So that briefing is expected at some point today, from our understanding. They have not yet announced a time. Obviously, so much still to sort through. There's tremendous pressure on the NTSB to deliver preliminary investigation results. As President Trump noted, an NTSB crash investigation can take years. It can absolutely take years. There can be various committee meetings and forums that need to happen to interview those who were associated with the actual crash in question. So there's still a lot that has to transpire, but there's a lot of pressure on the NTSB in the immediacy of the moment right now to deliver something that tells the American people as to why this happened. And if we hear anything regarding the NTSB and the briefing, will be back up on most platforms. I can't promise on every platform, depending on where we are in the day with the Stream Center and our normal programming and our normal operations, but we'll do our very best to get back up on stream in as many places as possible and bring you that NTSB briefing so that we can find out a little bit more as to what happened around 9 o'clock last night at Reagan National Airport. Again, 67 people dead as a result of this crash, 60 passengers, 4 American Airlines crew members, and 3 military personnel. And I would imagine in the next 90 or so minutes, we'll get more names and more details as to who was tragically lost last night in the Potomac and above it. Thank you so much for joining us here on stream. We will have additional information. You can go to WFLA.com as we get more and more details on this story. And we'll have, of course, more in our newscast tonight on WFLA News Channel 8. I'd like to thank Garrett for joining me here in the Stream Center, Jim Cardoso, Eric Kasnick as well earlier on in the live stream. Be well out there, folks, and we'll see you soon here from the Stream Center.